In 1971, when I lived in Austin and was applying for a job. After I was hired to teach at Trinity, Terry telephoned to welcome me to the fold and offered whatever help I needed in moving to a new town. And we developed a friendship that has lasted for over 40 years. 40 years. Terry has more than the usual qualifications for college teaching. He was the graduated first in his class, high school class, of 365 students at the best high school in Houston, Texas. He was the commander of the high school ROTC unit. He was the state champion debater and president of the opera club in high school.
Sing us a song.
And that the person that he destroyed at the state meet in the debate championship later showed up at Trinity as his boss. I can understand Terry's first three qualifications. He's an excellent scholar. He likes to boss people around. He doesn't tolerate people who disagree with him. But when I asked him how he managed to achieve the presidency of the high school opera club at age 17, he explained he invented and organized the club, which met at his house, and therefore he made himself president. Terry also plays the piano. He spent a year at law school. He taught high school for a time, and his own father, a very devoted Republican, fired him from a position in his business when Terry refused to take a Kennedy for President sticker on his car. Terry was in the U.S. Army for some years and worked in intelligence. At one point, he was supposed to train people the art of surveillance. So he had his men follow Bridget around town as she went about her daily business to see how good they were at following an unsuspecting possible spy. Bridget was not pleased, and Terry better be very glad that she was not having an affair. Some years ago, Terry and I authored a number of books which we had to get past the Texas State Board of Education, and 6 times. And every time we showed up there, we had representatives from the Ku Klux Klan, the male chauvinist, the fundamentalist Christians, and the McCarthyites waiting for us. And one episode was remarkable, absolutely remarkable. One of the state board members accused Terry of being a communist and favoring communism. And I always suspected that Terry's responses on such occasions were influenced by his early and very, very interest in grand opera. He did everything except fall on his sword. He rose to his feet, wrapped himself in the flag, and with a martyred expression delivered a 10-minute speech on the fact that he had served his country well and loyal as a devoted officer in the United States Army. His voice trembled a little when he proclaimed that no one had ever before questioned his patriotism. And he was not just hurt, but he was also outraged, appalled, and insulted at such a ridiculous suggestion. He then proceeded to demand that all 15 members of the State Board of Education take out their copies of the book in question and read the section on page 181. While Terry, like a 19th century schoolmarm, read the text aloud to them, in which he'd written that communism was doomed to fail as a political system. The Chester members of the State Board approved the book. Just like that. One spring, Terry and I had to go to Florida to meet with some editors. He was doing a book on world history and national security, and I was doing a book on government and national security. And we were there at this very, very nice place on the beach. And we were all in the water. It was springtime. The water was very, very cold. And I looked up and I saw Terry coming out. He was dressed in a designer bathrobe, carrying a designer towel, and he strolled very, very slowly to the beach. He stood at the beach at the edge of the water. He took off his shoe, put his toe in the water, decided it was too cold, put his shoe back on, and went back into the hotel to the happy hour. That was his. For some years, Terry took students to Russia to learn something about the country and the culture, and I went along on one of those tours. By the way, on that tour, Terry had a private room, and I lived with 25 students. I won't forget that. One of them is here tonight. Once we were trying to get into, I was trying to get into a Russian Orthodox church, and they were having a little service there, and I ran back to the hotel to tell Terry, come, quick, you know, this is St. Petersburg, they're having a church service. So we got back there, the service was over, and Terry approached this young lady who was standing there, kind of a guard, and said something to her in Russian, and she looked horrified and took off. And we got back to the hotel, and I said, what did you tell her? And he said, I told her she'd wait here, and we'd come back for the next service. Well, he checked his dictionary, and he had said, if you will wait here, I will come back and run over you with a truck.
Little refresher on the lady. That was a low moment in my life.
The kids on another tour begged to go to a Russian nightclub. And so one evening, Terry took them all to a very fancy bar and restaurant. They were sitting at a table drinking and talking when a lovely young woman, undoubtedly a Russian nocturnal maiden of comfort and joy, and perhaps she was probably a KGB spy also, approached Terry and asked him to dance. The always gracious Terry hesitated and then gallantly got up and danced with her. All evening, she would disappear and then reappear at Terry's side until about 10 o'clock p.m. when she said that unfortunately she would have to leave and invited Terry to join her at another unspecified location.
I wasn't dumb enough to
Terry,
say yes.
oh no, Terry looked absolutely terrified. He quickly recovered and made some very polite refusal. She smiled sadly, kissed him on the cheek, and left. Later, Terry said ruefully that the lady in black was very pretty and very charming, but he was convinced that refusing her advances had saved him much trouble, much expense, and also probably many years of medical treatment. And he added, I think I knew what Bridget would have said. Over the years, while his kids were in Catholic schools, Terry bought many, many raffle tickets for various church and school fundraisers. The only prize he ever won was a bicycle. Terry estimated that the $75 bicycle that he won probably cost him over the years more than $6,000.
Chris got it.
When his son Terrence was a kid and needed a considerable amount of dental work, Terry was advised by one of his relatives to take Terrence to Houston to be treated by a particularly fine orthodontist. So for many months, Terry, who was always very careful about planning, arranged his own and Terrence's schedules so that he could drive his son to Houston to see the expert. Everyone was very pleased with the results. However, after some months of time, very time-consuming trips to and from Houston, one day the dentist's office called to cancel the usual appointment. It was rescheduled for another day. On the appointed day, Terry and Terrence went back to Houston. The dentist made a point of apologizing for the cancellation and explained that he did not live in Houston, and thus when some unusual event precluded his trip to Houston, he was forced to cancel his appointments. Terry asked where he lived. You may have guessed that the dentist lived in San Antonio and had an office 3 blocks from the Smart's house. From that day until the end of Terrence's treatment, he rode his bicycle to the dentist's office. Terry is an excellent genealogist and has spent much time stomping around in graveyards in 8 states, collecting tick bites and copying inscriptions off of all kinds of tombstones. He's a leading authority on Texas Germans. As editor of the German Heritage Society newsletter, Terry discovered that Germans are divided into 2 groups: those who drink and dance, and those who scout and remain sober. I'll let you guess which one he belongs to. Professionally, Terry's been an exemplary colleague, and for years he was our excellent and ever-patient department chair, 12 years as a matter of fact. His early legal training may have been responsible for the fact that he always knew the rules and was able to keep the department out of too much trouble, mainly, regardless of the situation. He always dressed appropriately and spoke appropriately and kept our ragged little group of history professors in line, although he must have despaired many times at our behavior and at our collective intelligence, or lack thereof. When we were writing books together, Terry and I began to think alike to such an extent that our wives, Bridget and Marguerite, decided that we were both so prissy and so neurotic that we were actually identical twins who were separated at birth. If that were true, I'd be deeply honored to have such a remarkable brother. We're going to miss you, Terry, but 45 years at Trinity, as you say, is enough. Enough. Ladies and gentlemen, let us stand and raise our glasses to a fine scholar, teacher,